Okay, so my name is Rebecca Wallace. I am the EDDMapS coordinator here at the University of Georgia's Center for Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health. I am going to go ahead and start showing you right off the bat with my screen showing the EDDMapS homepage. Can everyone see this yet?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes it has the green box showing, what screen you're on, and sometimes it doesn't. So this is the EDDMapS homepage. So most people send in data one of two ways, either through our website or through one of our smartphone apps. We do get data a couple of other ways, but I'll just show you what, through the website at least, what they see. So to submit data or to really have much of any interaction with the the data part of EDDMapS, to request data, anything like that, you do need to have an account. So just kind of reminding everyone of that. So if someone did want to contribute data to us, they would sign in and then select report sightings. This asks you what type of species you're reporting. What this allows the form to do is to customize certain fields to those specific species categories. So we'll just choose plants here. Then it'll ask what state you're reporting in, and we'll choose Florida. And that'll come up with the plants form for reporting. The insect form, the wildlife form, and the disease form will look slightly different, just in terms of the information up top. So with this plant form, what you're seeing here, all required fields are in red, and there really are only a few required fields. So pest, we'll just pick the one right at the top there. As you start typing something in, it'll start auto-suggesting species types, but we'll just pick one right off the top there. And the infestation section, some of the other forms might call this something slightly different, but this is the section that might slightly differ among the different species categories. Plant description, of course, you wouldn't have that for insects or animals. So this area is going to differ slightly, but all of them only require observation date. Status is, it defaults to positive. That means I saw it. Negative is I looked for it and did not find it. So you can select negative to denote if you looked for something like hydrilla, water hyacinth, Kogon grass, something like that, where you looked for this specifically and did not find it. Treated is I found it and I treated it in some way. So either you pulled the Japanese stilt grass or you applied some sort of chemical to your stand of Kogon grass or something like that. So you just want to indicate that some sort of management activity happened. Again, it defaults to positive because most people are reporting, I just saw something. Infested area is just kind of the estimation of the area that's infested by that particular species. Survey area is the entire area you were looking for this species. And then some of the other things are kind of self-explanatory, like description, was the plant damaged, and so forth. In the location section, so from here down is basically identical across the different types of forms. Again, it's auto-entered Florida because that is the state you selected to begin with. If you select a county, so we're just going to pick a county at random, the map on the right centers on that particular county. And in this section, as you can see, these are in red. These are the only fields that are absolutely required. Most people do put in either drop a point As you can see here, you just select one of the markers in the map box to denote what type of shape you want to contribute. So if you wanted to draw a line and just say, okay, I saw Kogon grass all along this particular roadway, you can do that and double click to end it. Or you can draw a polygon and say this whole area was infested with something. If you drop a point, draw a line, or draw a polygon, it will put in latitude and longitude. These latitude and longitude, if you draw a line or a polygon, it's the centroid of that particular shape. The shape you draw is retained in our database. It's just a visualization of where this center is. If you do draw a shape, if you go up to the infested area section, it does put that in automatically. So you don't have to, if you're going to draw a shape anyway, you don't need to worry about entering infested area. From there, you can also put in some information about the location. So you could say it's at the corner of this street and that street, or across from this particular store, or something similar. An important field here, private. This is important on the reporter side of things as well as on the verifier side of things. Private governs specifically the coordinates associated with the record. So you can hover over the question mark and a pop-up tells you what this particular field is. If you are on private land, or for some reason you don't want the exact coordinates publicly available, you can select yes for private, and the only people who ever see those coordinates are the reporter and administrators and the verifiers in the act of verifying. That's currently the setup. So if this record does become publicly available, the coordinates won't be publicly available. They won't be available on maps and downloads anywhere except just for the reporter to look at in their own area. Images right now, up to 5 images can be added with any information about the images. And then any additional comments can be made in the lower section, as well as if someone else was with you and they identified it, if you took a voucher specimen and where it might be located, and so forth. So this is basically the form that most people end up seeing and submitting data through the website. I'm not going to go over the apps in this particular session. The forms on the apps are a lot shorter. So there's a lot less information that can be entered through the forms available through our apps. I just wanted to show that to you real quick. So this is data coming in. So next I want to show you the data from the verifier side of things. So you want to be a verifier, or you are a verifier. Let me just show you. I am a verifier for just about everything. And because I am a verifier for just about everything, I get my emails for verification as a digest. Let me just have it show the pictures. There we go. Now show the, there it goes, showing the pictures. So I get to see a digest every 4 hours of all the records that have come in that I am allowed to verify based on my parameters. A lot of people are set up to get an email instantly when a record comes in that fits their parameters. And it looks like it's a very similar looking email, you just might get them more frequently. This gives me a little bit of information about the record itself, and then I can view all of the records online with this link. I can view this one record online to review it. or from the email, I can claim this record. I did put up a to-do for our programmer that this link may not be available in the instant emails, but that's not a problem. You can claim a record on the review records page as well. So if I want to go to review records, I can click this link and it takes me to the review records page. These are all the records that are available for reviewing that I'm allowed to review. Another way to reach this page is you click on My EDDMapS, and you would go to Admin Tools on the left, and you would click Review Records, which is the top option. I do want to note that if you want to adjust your settings on if you receive instant emails or digest emails, that's done in your profile. So you would go to Edit Profile in the left, and you would scroll most of the way down and Verifier email preference. So I'm signed up for the digest. If I wanted to go instant, I would click instant, but I definitely want to stay in the digest so I get not so many emails. So again, I'm going to go to the review records section. So this particular page is, it allows me to see a little bit about the records. It also allows me to filter the records to only show certain records. So say I wanted to see, you know, first report by user. I could do that with this particular filtering option in the top left. If I only wanted to see plants, I would check off everything except plants. And what would result in this window is just plant records. So let's say I wanted to see records by one particular person. So I'm gonna, if I can spell his name right, select Chuck and just see Chuck's records. I can also filter even specifically down to a species by Chuck. So these are just his reports for this one species. I'm just going to go ahead and see all of his records. What this allows me to do is see just a little bit of his reports and start to make some decisions. I can also, sorting is an option by species types. It just automatically sorts by the ID. I can also sort, filter by date entered. So if I just wanted to see things in the past year, I can do that. So in this case, I have 12 entries by Chuck on a variety of species, most of them in Tift County, Georgia, one of them in a different county. These are across a couple of years, so since 2019. This field tells me what is the last thing that happened with this record. So in this case, the top record here, someone asked for information about this record. Everything else is unreviewed except this one, which has been deferred. Claimed by, so claiming allows a verifier to say, I want to take responsibility for the communication about this record. So there are a lot of verifiers in Florida, and there have been cases in Florida and in other places where multiple verifiers are asking questions of the reporter, and that can become overwhelming for some people. So what this allows the verifiers to do is to say, okay, this person is taking responsibility for talking to the reporter about this record. They're going to be the one to ask for images or ask for extra information. It does not prevent anyone else from verifying this record or reviewing the record. It just lets people know I'm kind of taking lead on this particular record. The images icon allows you to preview these images, so you can just hover over them and see whatever images have been provided. Any decisions that have been made, you can see those records after. So these links in the top right allow you to see records you've recently reviewed, to see records that have been recently reviewed by anyone that fit your parameters. So if you're a plants verifier in Florida and someone else reviewed a record, you can still see that record if you go to this link, if it's a plant in Florida. You won't be able to see insects or things that are not in your particular area of responsibility. This link allows you to see records that have been reviewed but have not been made public. So this third link. So there are situations where a record's been reviewed, but for some reason the verifier decided to not make it publicly available. It could be that it was incorrect in some capacity. It could be that there are some privacy concerns or something. They have not made the record visible to the public yet. The next link, view deleted records, and this is exactly what it sounds like. All you can do is see the record. If you delete a record, you cannot bring it back. I have to be the one to bring it back, and it is not a button pressing process. It's a little more complicated than that. All you can do is see the record that's been deleted. And this last link here allows you to view records that have been marked as unable to be confirmed, and we'll go over what that status is in a minute. The final link isn't about the records themselves, it's about the filtering process. So if I applied a bunch of different filters and I wanted to just clear it and start from scratch again, I could just click that link and it would clear all the filters I applied. So I am going to select Chuck's record for Bermuda grass, and I'm just going to open that in a new tab. And this is what a verifier sees. So the species is right at the top here. And then the information provided by Chuck, as well as any information we added to it, automatically is provided in this view here. So you get to see information about where it was reported, any additional information about the infestation, reporter information. So there is some information in here that you as a verifier would see that would potentially not be publicly available. So reporter, this is what the public sees. This is the public name for this individual. However, these three fields down here are not publicly available. Reported by, so there is a field. I'm just going to go back to the profile page here to show it to you. There's a field called anonymous reporting. I am not set to anonymous. If I were set to anonymous, this name here, or if Chuck was set to anonymous, this name here would say something along the lines of EDDMapS reporter. It basically allows them to report without having their name attached to the record in any way. You as a verifier do potentially need that information so that you have an idea of if this person may be known to you. A lot of our verifiers are local as well as our reporters, so they may know who these people are and have an idea of their level of expertise. Email, that is not publicly available. We don't just automatically have people's emails publicly available. And the same with the phone number. So the phone number is not a required field. But if it is entered, it is viewable by the verifiers, and it's only in this verification process. So if you made this record publicly available and you were just viewing it on our distribution maps, you know, you were just going to, let me just pull up a record here. So this is a publicly available record. As you can see in this reporter information, their email address, their phone number are not available here. And then there's just some other information about how they reported the record, what the current status is, and so forth. This other section is where a couple of different things are available. So as you can see, it says census district. So in this case, this record is in the Georgia 8 congressional district. There may be other information such as Florida SISMAs, public lands, research areas, wilderness areas, water body names, things like that, that are automatically being assigned to these records based on their location. And this is also where images are available. So in this case, this is an image that was provided by Chuck. As you can see, it's not of Bermuda grass in this case. So that provides me some additional information, because if it's not Bermuda grass, this is just taken inside of a house or something. This is appearing to me like it's a test record. So based on the information I have, which is that it looks like a test record, that's very important in this reviewing process. This map here, so he provided with his record location, so coordinates. So again, those are not required. He did provide those. In fact, because it's an iPhone record, they're automatically assigned, or the person can drop them themselves. So if he had selected for this to be a private record, you as a verifier still get to see this particular map. That map may not be available to the public, and so that's one more piece of information you as a verifier can see that may not be publicly available. So that's all the information that this particular record has for us. Below the map, there's a section called Record Review History and Discussion. This is where all the information about the review process that has happened so far is located. So current status is set to deferred, and it goes newest to oldest. So this is what happened last. What happened first is that Chuck submitted it in 2019. In November, I claimed this record, and it automatically sets it to defer so that it reminds me to come back to this later. If there's any information you as a reviewer or a verifier want to provide to other verifiers, you can put messages in this message section here and add it. So if you visited the site and noticed something, if you emailed with the reporter and they provided additional information you wanted to provide to other verifiers, you can put it in this particular section. Once you've come to a point where you either want to ask questions of the reporter, or you want to interact with the record on some level, then you would go down to these buttons at the bottom. So the first option is claim record. If I try to claim this record, it's going to tell me it's already been claimed, because it has in fact already been claimed. All it really does is let other people know that you're taking responsibility for the communication about this record. Upload additional images. So if you go out to a site and take photos, if you're a technician or an intern, student worker, whoever takes photos, or if the reporter sends you photos via email or some other method, then you may want to include those in the record itself. You can do so with the Upload Images button. It's exactly like it looks like. You would go and choose a file, add additional information if you wanted to, and then at the bottom you'd click Submit. I don't have any photos I'm going to add to this. If you wanted to defer this record and come back to it later, you can click Defer. You can send a message to yourself in the future. So, come back next week, 6 months from now, whatever. You can add the message of what you want to remind yourself of, and then you would select a date. So if this is a bad time of year to go look for a particular species, you can set it for when it would be better. Or if you're going to go back to that area later for some other reason, you can remind yourself before you go out that you wanted to review this record. And then you click continue. You can request additional images. So if you click this button, are you sure you want to request additional images from the reporter? What this does is it sends an email to the reporter asking for more images, and it includes a link so they know which record you're referring to. All this would be documented in this review history discussion section. So it would say additional images have been requested, additional information has been requested, and so forth, and who did that particular action. Request additional information. So this is a pop-up that just provides you a block that you can put your text into, and as it says, the email, this becomes email from then on. So the message is sent to them through their email. Any replies they have would go to your email rather than coming through EDDMapS. So this only captures that kind of initial request. And you would put your text in there and then click continue to complete the action. There is one more button that doesn't show up on this particular record. If I were in the rose rosette disease record, if I was at a rose rosette disease record, there would be another button that says request sample. Request sample starts a whole, it's not really a chain of events, but requesting a sample provides the information on how the sample should be collected, who they should send the sample to. There are diagnostic labs we have partnerships with in different regions of the country. And when the sample is sent to them, they evaluate it for this particular disease, and then a report is provided back on was this disease present in this sample. So that is right now a single species thing. So in this case, once you've completed all your actions with kind of the white buttons, then you would come to the I want to make a decision time. So you have review and release and review and don't release. And again, if you hover over these little pop-ups come up, tooltips come up telling you what these buttons do. Release means if something is available to the public. So review and release means I want to review this record, and when I'm done reviewing it, it will become publicly available. Review and don't release, I want to review this record, but after I've reviewed it, it should not become publicly available. For this particular record, I'm going to select review and don't release for two reasons. One, it has a couple more options to show, and two, based on my evaluation of this photo and the reporter in this case, this is likely a test record. So I'm going to select review and don't release. This is not a record that should be made publicly available. So once you make your selection, the review form comes up on the screen. It appears below these selections. So there are several fields here, but really only a couple are required for filling out. As I am in my own EDDMapS account, it fills out my name here. If there were some sort of communal account, like a, Friends of St. Clair River or something like that, you could put in your individual name for that communal account, so people have an idea of who actually reviewed this record. But for now, it filled in my name, and that's who I am. Verification method. So this is how you came to your decision. Again, there are all these tooltips you can hover over to see information about these particular fields. So I'm going to open this up, and there are several options. I'm only going to cover a couple of them because most of them are rather obvious, or you probably won't use them very much, or they're kind of combined. So reporter expertise. This is saying that I am basing my decision about this record on the known or expected expertise of the reporter. So if this were Chuck reporting Kogon grass and he didn't have a photo, I know Chuck knows how to identify Kogon grass. If everything looked right with the record, and I know Chuck knows how to identify Kogon grass, I might say, based on his expertise, this is what I'm basing my review on. Photographs, I'm basing my review on the photographs provided. So verifier expertise. This is my level of expertise. So if he reported kudzu right outside my office, I know there's kudzu right outside my office. So this is my knowledge I am basing my review off of. My knowledge of the species, the area, whatever other information I have. Specimens, you have a specimen. You have the actual organism that you evaluated. And then anything voucher has to do with things being submitted to a museum, a diagnostic lab, and so sorry, not a diagnostic lab, a museum, a herbarium, a lab of some sort, and so forth. And then diagnostic lab samples, again, that's having more to do with diseases and certain insects and so forth, being submitted specifically to a diagnostic lab. Identified by. So this field allows you to note if someone other than you identified this particular, the organism they're reporting. So the example I like to give about this is there is someone reporting bamboo in the Northeast. There are not many people who could identify bamboo from a photograph. It's just one of those things. However, there are plenty of verifiers in the Northeast. So one of the verifiers has a contact who is a bamboo expert, and so he will submit bamboo records that come in to this particular expert for him to review. And you can send records to other people by downloading a PDF. So you can, in the top right here, there's a link to download the record as a PDF. Really, this should only be used for getting help with identification. You can also note what date the record was reviewed for identification. Next, identification credibility. So this is where you make your determination. This is where you say, I have decided this. So for a decision where, yes, this is what this is, you have possible, credible, and verified. Possible, lowest level of certainty, credible, somewhere in the middle, and verified, you are absolutely certain this is what this is. And that's kind of the most amount of guidance we give on this, because there are some people who have different opinions on what makes something verified. Some people want a herbarium sample that was, submitted somewhere, and some people are fine with knowing who the person was and that there were photographs provided. It's just up to the individual verifier. So say someone submitted something and it wasn't, the identification was incorrect. You have a couple different options there. So say someone was reporting hydrilla and it wasn't there. It may be useful to have that report changed from a positive to a negative. We usually recommend that as an option because it shows effort surveying for a particular species. It shows that it wasn't there when it was looked for. This allows you to know when something comes in if it wasn't found in certain months or years. This negative information is very, very important for some different groups, people who do modeling work, to know when things come in. Another option is change subject. So say someone reported hydrilla and it turned out to be Brazilian waterweed. So something that kind of looked similar, but you look at it closely, oh no, it's this other invasive species. Or say, you know, old world climbing fern and Japanese climbing fern, something like that. You know, ball python versus Burmese python. You have the opportunity to change the species so that you can still use the record. This allows you to, if you click change subject, an option will come up to change it to a new subject. So if this were in fact not Bermuda grass, but you know, let's say crowfoot grass or something similar, I could just, again, this is similar to any of our other subject entry fields. You know, I could say crowfoot, nope, that's the wrong foot. I could change it to crowfoot grass if I wanted to. What that would then do is the original record name would show up in the record form area. So it would just show up somewhere, I forget exactly where it shows up, but somewhere I think in here or somewhere similar. And it just keeps a documentation of what the original record was reported as. But this record up here would become crowfoot grass or whatever you changed it to. And it would show up on the proper maps and show up in the downloads and whatnot as well. One further option is, sorry, there are a couple more options. Unable to confirm. So say someone reported something, but they didn't get all the characteristics you needed for identification. Say that it didn't have flowers or didn't have fruit or it didn't have a picture of the leaves or something similar, and you were not able to confirm this particular record. If they're not replying to requests for additional photos or they can't provide them, if you can't go out to the area, for some reason you are just unable to confirm what they reported was correct, you can choose unable to confirm. What that will do is get the record out of your review queue, but not make it publicly available. Again, unable to confirm and delete are only options on review and don't release. They are not options on review and release. In this case, in looking at this particular photo, there's no Bermuda grass in here. I know Chuck's always testing our apps and so forth. I would say this would be a test record. So you can delete a record. When you select delete, again, it will not be released to the public, and you have to say why you're deleting it. Comments are required because the notification that a record was deleted is sent to the reviewer. And oftentimes they want to know why the record was deleted. So in this case, I would say something like test record. Sometimes records are deleted because it's a report of a native species that has no value for monitoring. The species they were reporting anyway has no value as a negative record. So say they reported dandelion. Dandelion is an introduced species, and what they took a picture of was in fact not dandelion, it was something native. In this case, what I would do is I would select delete. There's no value in a negative dandelion record, and there's no value in a native lawn weed type record. So report source ID, what this allows you to do is note where this record kind of came from. Did it come from someone with the, you know, some sort of government agency? Did it come from the general public? So forth. It's not a required field. You don't have to fill it out if you don't know who this person is or don't want to assume anything. So private. Private, I went over with the record submission form, again, it still allows the record to exist in our database, but it hides the coordinates from the public. So if this, if Chuck had said, yes, I want my record to be private when he submitted it, this would already be set to yes. You as a verifier can look at a record, look at the area it's been reported in, and make the decision that a record should be private. If it appears to be on private land, if the photo has sensitive plants in the background that are likely to be poached, things like that, you may want to make that record private. And then there are two options here. So there's reviewer comments and there's public comments. So reviewer comments do not show up on the public record. If you do mark delete, this is where your comments should go to the reporter. Public comments do show up on the public record if it's made public, if it's released. So public comments would be things like, say the person reported Japanese climbing fern, but it was in fact old world climbing fern. You may want to note for the public comments why you changed it to that other species. You could say, based on leaf shape or whatever, this is this species. That way, if there's a record of what happened. Again, public comments are not required. Reviewer comments are only required if it's marked delete. And the only other things, I don't think even verification methods required. Identification credibility is required. You have to say what action you're taking. Once you're satisfied with the data entry in this particular form, then you would click submit. I like to use this particular record as an example, so I am not going to click submit. If I did click submit, it would take me back to this page. So one other thing you can do, so as I mentioned, there's a lot of records here by Chuck. A lot of what he does is testing type records. But if this were a lot of data by someone who is an expert in something, you may want to review a lot of records at one time. If they've submitted 100 records or 1,000 records, you may want to review a lot of their records at one time, just to say, yeah, this is likely correct based on what I know about them. There are these little boxes next to the ID number on the left, and you can click several of them, and a form opens up below the table. What this allows you to do is review a record positively, saying, yes, this is likely what it is. You only have the options of credible and possible. So you can't say something's verified without actually looking at a record. You can't bulk delete any records. You have to look at an individual record and decide if you want to delete it or not. You can provide reviewer comments. You can provide public comments. You can bulk decide if these records should be private or not. And you can bulk decide if these records should be released or not. And then you'd click submit, and those, in this case, 4 records would have the same action applied to them. So that is the table, the individual reviewing a record, and I went over these. All of these tables look the same. One thing I am going to show you is, click this. So this is records I've recently reviewed. And it'll take just a second to populate. So as you can see, the table looks very, very similar. And it'll take, like I said, just a second to populate. There we go. So if I click on one of these records, and I go all the way to the bottom, this is a record that's already been reviewed and actually made public. There are different options down here. There's make restricted, which covers releasing a record. So it goes from being publicly available to not publicly available if I click make restricted. And then there's contest review. So if you do come across a record that isn't correct, it's been reviewed, it's made its way into our public area of our database, but you go, oh no, that's not correct, that's a different species, you can find the record in the review records section and contest the review. What that does, if I click contest review, it takes me to a page that looks like this, so I can review the record again. I have all the same options. All it did was take it back into the review queue. So I just wanted to cover that real quick because contest review is an important feature. And the contesting of the review does get noted in the record history and discussion section. So any questions on this review process here? And there's only, there's a few enough participants that you can just turn on your mic and ask your question if you'd like.
I have one question on reviewed and credible,
Yeah.
or verified and credible, I'm sorry. Does verify have to mean that you physically saw, you went out and saw the plant? The way, because I reviewed for a while, and then when Greg Walker, he said that they needed people for, I think I was assigned to Polk, Hardy, and DeSoto counties in Florida, and that was it. And I would get records and I would review them and that, but then after a while, other people were reviewing them, so I just stopped doing it. But the one thing I never was positive on was that verified and credible. I understand the possible part, but do you have to lay eyes on the physical plant, or as an example, to say verified, or if you don't go out to look at it, is that credible?
We leave that up to the reviewers, the verifiers, because there are some species you can look at a photo and say, yeah, that's absolutely it. And there are some species where you have to, the difference between a native and a non-native, you actually have to touch it to feel, does it have a scabrous, or a sandy feeling leaf or something that's not captured by, by a photograph. Or in some cases with some insects, you basically have to dissect them to know which particular species it is. So we leave it up to the verifiers to determine for themselves or for the group they are particularly working with what really constitutes verified versus credible versus possible. There are some people who've said you have to physically hold it in your hands, and there are some people who, like I said, you can look at a photograph and know, yes, it is, or yes, it isn't with absolute certainty.
Okay. Yeah, the way I always did it was depending on if you sent me the photograph, the location made sense, and I knew the person, it was verified. Like if I knew, if somebody from the state park said that there's Kogan grass in Polk County, I wouldn't even hesitate. Yeah, because Polk County's got Kogan grass everywhere. But if it was something either from the public or if it was something that I didn't know much about, then I would either have to go look at it or say credible, depending on the photograph. So, okay, that helps. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And we get that question a fair amount. So that's not an unusual question to get. There have been people, like I said, who you only assign it credible if it's basically been submitted to an herbarium or a museum or something similar. But it's really a situation and a lot of times species dependent determination. And like I said, individual groups or an individual person can decide these are the criteria I'm going to follow to designate possible versus credible versus verified. So are there any other questions in this particular section of the review process, either with the table itself or with the review kind of form area? So I am going to move on to another area, but you can if a question comes up, we're going to have another kind of question session after my next reviewing kind of part to this. So if you go to my EDDMapS, there is a link under review records called triage system. The triage system is currently only open to state or national verifiers, so people who are a verifier at an entire state level or who are a verifier for something at a national level. As I mentioned, I'm a reviewer for everything, so I can access the triage system. Right now, the triage system functions as a place to put a lot of data by a single reporter. So if I get 1 million records submitted from the U.S. Forest Service, this is a place that data can go, and a state level verifier can make some decisions rather than having every single individual record needing to be verified. In this case, right now, all we have in here is iNaturalist data. So we are harvesting from iNaturalist research grade data. And what that means is it's a record in their system that fits essentially 2 parameters. It's identified at the species level or lower, so species, subspecies, variety, and so forth. And that verification has been agreed upon by 2/3 of the respondents, and it has to be more than one respondent. So if 2 people have identified it and they agree, then it reaches research grade. If you have 3 people and only 2 of them agree, it's not research grade. You have to get over 2/3 of the respondents agreeing on an identification. And the record has to be not marked as planted or captive. I think it's actually cultivated or captive. So if someone submits a observation and the plant is in a pot, or it's been obviously planted in a in front of a business or something, those records are supposed to be marked as cultivated or captive. And the same would go like if someone had a pet snake or a pet lizard or something, they should mark it as captive or cultivated. So if you want more information about the triage system itself, if you're a state level verifier, on the right hand side there are several links. So view your pending reports. These are all records that have had some sort of decision made. View stats. So this is a pop-up that tells you what the current stats are in this particular triage system. It tells you what's been successful and what has had issues and so forth. The triage fact sheet. So this is going to open in a new window, or a new tab rather, and it tells you how to get to the triage system and what each of the, how to navigate around it and make decisions. It tells you about the table itself and about the manage section. And I'll just go over that really quick. So I mentioned that you have to be a state level or higher verifier. It provides you the state. So for some of our verifiers, they cover more than one state. So we needed to provide state. Tells you the reporter. In this case, it's currently all going to be from iNaturalist, but I mentioned we could have at some point U.S. Forest Service, National Park Service, and other data coming in through this way. It tells you the common name and the scientific name for that particular species. So in the case of this top record here, this is all going to be brown and knoll data for Florida. This is all the brown and knoll data currently waiting to be triaged for Florida. It tells you what the nativity is. So the reason we have this is because there are some species that are native to certain areas of the US, but not native to others. So it doesn't make a lot of sense necessarily for California poppy to maybe be added to our database in California. So California may choose to not want to add that data. But it may be important in other areas of the US where that particular species might be invasive. It tells you how many records are in this particular batch, and you can sort by most of these fields. It tells you how many existing records we already have reviewed in the EDDMapS database. It tells you, does this particular species appear on regulatory lists or laws? And then the final column is managed. So this is where you're making your decision. So in this case, the top, I've been sorting and playing around with the sorting on that. So now the top option is in Wyoming for Dalmatian toadflax. There would be 23 species in this batch, and we already have 59,000 records for this species in Wyoming. It's now up to the verifier to decide, do they want these 23 records, do they want them to go to the verifiers? So Dalmatian toadflax is a species which is an ornamental. Do they want to evaluate each of these 23 records to make sure they don't have planted specimens in here? You would think the same thing for Callery pear or Bradford pear, very commonly planted tree, as well as a very commonly escaping tree. In Florida, you might also have problems like coral ardesia, very common ornamental, also very invading of natural areas and so forth. So it may be worthwhile to scrutinize if these particular records are planted or not planted specimens. Same thing, so with bulk verify, so say Brazilian pepper tree in Florida. Is this a species that could be potentially bulk verified? You have over 36,000 records of Brazilian pepper tree. This batch contains almost 1,000 records. Is this species very easy to identify? Is this species hardly ever planted or an ornamental specimen? These are things you can take into account when evaluating if you want to bulk verify these records. And then finally, there's ignore. So I mentioned there was the California poppy earlier. You may not want that data to be in EDDMapS at all, because it may not make sense for California to have records of California poppy. So we provided the ignore option. So if you don't want this data in EDDMapS at all, you can select ignore, and that data will just go away. It won't enter EDDMapS, it won't be in the deleted area, it's just not, it doesn't even remotely enter our database. So because iNaturalist has its own kind of quirks, there is an iNaturalist triage info fact sheet. So if we open that up, it tells you a little bit about what I already mentioned, where research grade records are pulled. Records achieve research grade when more than 2/3 of the identification at species level, it should be species level or lower, agree, and the record is not marked as captive or cultivated. So what this is showing here, this particular example, this heavenly bamboo record did achieve research grade status, but it was extremely likely it was planted. So you see what's likely a brick residence in the background. It's in a residential area. This record was not marked as planted, captive or cultivated. So that's why it's important to think of, with each species, is it likely there could be some data in here that isn't an invading example? Another example here, crepe myrtle. So there's 162, at the time I took this screenshot, 162 records of crepe myrtle. Crepe myrtle is an extremely common ornamental shrub slash small tree. So, but there are examples of it escaping. So it makes a lot of sense for these to be evaluated one by one to weed out those instances of planting. And you can usually tell by, in this case, like I was mentioning, the picture provided as well as the location, if it's likely planted. So once you've made a decision to either for it to go to the verifiers or to bulk verify for those specific two options, there is, they won't go into those two paths immediately. So what you see here is pretty much the amount of information we pull for the initial pull. So we're getting the species, and in the background, we're getting their identification numbers and the location. This gives us just enough information so that verifiers can make decisions. Once they make their decision, then we pull the rest of the record. So there are going to be instances, if you look in pending reports, where something went strange. In this case, this particular record, so Laura Van Riper made the decision, but between the time of pulling that small amount of information and the decision being made, this particular record was no longer research grade. You can actually click on that ID and it'll open to the iNaturalist record. So you can see what actually happened. So in this case, a couple people said it was Japanese knotweed, and then someone else mentioned it's Bohemian knotweed, and now it's not in agreement on what this particular species is. So it's gone back to the genus level, and its status is needs ID. So there was agreement for a short amount of time. Now there's no longer agreement. And so we won't get that data until it's back to research grade, whichever species it ends up being. I do want to note that if this disagreement happened after it was triaged and in our database, we won't know that happens at this point. So we don't get updates at this time from iNaturalist. We're not pulling updates to evaluate if something has changed after it's in our database. Now, when we pull data, we aren't getting that day's data. We're getting a couple weeks old data. So usually if these disagreements do happen, it's within the first few to several days of a decision being made. So there is a buffer period on the data we're getting. So hopefully most of those disagreements kind of work themselves out. So we're in this pending report section. So for some of these, I can go ahead and say, okay, some sort of error happened here. I can see nothing changed with the record itself. So I'm going to go back to this record and I'm going to re-queue it. And hopefully that record will get resolved. Again, it'll take just a few moments to kind of see what happens. And now it says success. When you make a decision to send it to the verifier, so I'm going to go back to the triage homepage. When you make a decision to send it to the verifiers, and again, it just takes a second because I can see many, many more things than most of you will be able to see. Most of you will only have the one state. Most of you will have one category of species, so just plants, just insects, or so forth. And your process will be much faster. Once you've made a decision to send it to the verifiers, again, it doesn't happen automatically because we have to go and grab all the information about those records. So just be aware that if you do get into this, into the triage section, that you can't send something to verifiers and then immediately go to the review records page to verify them. You've got to give it some amount of time to for the system to go and get the records, and it'll take longer the more records they have. So if I'd sent these Brown and Knowles to the verifiers, that'll take longer than a minute or two for 14,000 records to make their way over to us. So this is the triage system. That's the majority of what you kind of would likely need to know about it. Again, this is kind of my time with you guys, so if you have any questions about the triage system, you can feel free to ask them right now. I am open to questions. This is a new system. Most of you probably weren't aware it even existed. We just kind of instituted it this year. Okay, there's a chat. Let me see here. Okay, so someone mentioned captive species for there's a difference between captive species for plants and animals. Sorry, this is a long question.
Yeah, sorry, that's me. I was going to send it when you were talking, but you stopped just as I was sending it.
Okay.
So, yeah, you had mentioned the captive species, and I know this might not pertain necessarily to being a verifier, but one thing that I've noticed is the challenge that comes from knowing whether or not an animal might have been a very recently released captive animal, and that can impact researchers that are downloading that data who might be assuming that a point is indicative that an animal can survive in that location or is part of a reproductive population. And I just feel like that's a little bit different for plants that usually move through reproductive cycling, although of course they could be purposely planted as well by somebody. So I guess my point is, is that a concern that you guys have or have ever addressed in any kind of way? Because if not, it's something that I've run into, and I think that's something that I don't know what the solution is, if it's just a disclaimer or something like that, just some way for people to know who are downloading the data to not make any assumptions about what that data means, I guess, because it's come up a couple of times actually.
Yeah, and we see actually the same thing with plants. So I'll give you a little bit of story time here. So in Minnesota, maybe about 6-8 years ago, we were talking with one of our partners in Minnesota, and they were concerned because we showed Minnesota as having a lot of yellow star thistle, which is an invasive plant you absolutely do not want. And they had talked to various herbarium curators in their state, and nobody really had any records of yellow star thistle. There was one in a book from quite some time ago, but it was we found one, so a waif, as it would be called in the plant world. Like a one-off, like it just kind of showed up there, but it never established. So those kinds of situations do exist, and we can remove data if it's determined that it shouldn't have been there in the first place. With something like recently escaped wildlife, there is the opportunity to, we could say something on the data, in our about section or something similar, that if you only see one somewhere, it's possible that it was an escape, or it's possible that it was a previously planted situation. You see that with old home sites for certain ornamental, like bulbs that just live there forever, even though the house has long since decayed and rotted away. So there is some interesting things we could do, but with regards to species like that, but we don't currently have any sort of disclaimer that. I think in iNaturalist the other day, I saw a report of iguana in the Atlanta area or something similar, somewhere in Georgia. And yeah, my first thought is, oh, that's an escape, or someone took their iguana outside and just put it on the ground or something. But to someone who doesn't know that those kinds of things happen, it is possible that they would see that and go, is this the start of iguanas invading Georgia? I mean, I've heard so many bad things about it happening in Florida, iguanas falling from trees. We don't want that in Georgia. So there is some individual concerns I've heard about one-off kind of reports like that.
Yeah, and I would actually go a step farther. For example, ball pythons are an extremely popular pet in the pet trade. There's probably hundreds, maybe thousands of reports in Florida, but through just my experience in my position, there's absolutely no evidence that they're reproducing in the wild. It's just that they're so popular, the propagules pressure is so high that you just find them sometimes. And so if you look at a map, it looks like they might be invading all of Florida, but there's absolutely zero populations that we're aware of. We think they just can't survive that long in the state. So I guess that's where I was going with that. I don't think there is a way to know for a fact that this animal is wild versus this one is captive, because some of these are just too popular. And so you'll see them all over the state. It really comes down to being able to, I guess, be in the data weeds so much that you kind of start getting a sense for what might be establishing and what might not be. But yeah, so I guess my point is just that there are animals out there that you will have that issue with, and so anything we can do to just make sure the researchers, I guess, are aware that data may not be wild animals. It might be captive animals, but we just don't know.
Yeah, well, and that's why I, at least with our database, the verifiers can remove those records. So with iNaturalist, and maybe with some other databases that exist, there is no check for that where an independent person can flag something for removal. So you do have the opportunity for, if you see someone, holding a ball python in a living room, it's probably captive.
Right, yeah, and that I would definitely flag as captive.
Yeah. I mean,
it's just that if somebody asked me, what are all these ball pythons, I'd say they were all captive. But but at the same time, it's always possible I could be wrong. So I don't want to take all the ball python points out of Florida either.
Yeah. So yeah, any other questions? And we can talk about the triage system specifically, or we can talk about reviewing in general. One of the previous, meetings and demos I did, we got into talking about the apps and stuff like that as well. So we have plenty of time set aside today, so you can ask any questions you may have. So one thing that we are going to hopefully be doing in the coming year is making, we have a verifier quiz. It doesn't evaluate if you can identify something, it evaluates your ability to navigate around the verifier responsibilities. So that will be something we're adding to our website, is this quiz. And if you pass the quiz, then you can get kind of like a check mark next to your name, kind of like your, Twitter verified or something. And that will be something we add to the website as a thing you're able to do. So that will, like I said, that will be coming next year. So, and Matt pointed out, if you look at iNaturalist, or an iNaturalist record, so we'll just go ahead and go to iNaturalist. Go to identify, and here we go. So we'll see what's in Florida right now. So I don't know what any of these really are, so we'll just pick one. In this identify section, you can, there's a option at the bottom here under the photo. There's add to favorites, captive or cultivated and reviewed. So in the identification section, you can select captive or cultivated, and I wouldn't do that to these particular ones because I don't know that they are. But we can actually look at one of my records and you can see what it looks like after a record's already been evaluated. So we'll just pick this one. So this one's we're not in the identification section, but anybody can go here, and in the data quality assessment section, there is organism is wild. Again, you can say yes or no here. In this case, this was outside our air conditioner. So if these are marked that way, this changes this from research grade, this flag next to the name here, from research grade to casual. We are not harvesting any casual data into the triage system. So let me just go back to identify, and we're going to look for, again, Florida, and we'll look up Nandina. This is sometimes, oh, there's not, here we go. So again, this one is next to a house, and you can zoom in on the map they provide and see it's in a residential kind of area. When they reported it, they did not mark it as captive or cultivated or anything like that. If I were going to review this, that's what I would mark it as. I would say, I would check this box, and then I would agree with it, and that would change it. Actually, I can go ahead and check this box. And you'll see in a second, this will change from needs ID to casual. Actually, it still needs ID. I'll go ahead and agree with that. It'll change it to casual once it accepts my identification. There we go. So it changed it to casual. And so now we will not get this data into our database. Okay, so any questions about the review process, the triage system, EDDMapS in general, anything I can answer any questions on any of that?
Just one question that I have not reviewed in a while because every time I looked at one of the emails for to review it, somebody else had already done it. So if I go into my profile, can I see what counties I am tagged for, or is that something that you do?
It's something you can do, but not in your profile.
Okay.
And it's not so complete as that. So if I go to tools and training, this is anybody can go to tools and training. And if you go to report verifier lookup, it's midway down on the database tools on the left here. Click on that, and you can drop a point and select a species. So we'll just pick Japanese climbing fern. And it will tell you who will receive the notification email to verify that record. You can zoom in even further. So all these different, and I need to remove him. I've been told I need to remove him. These people will receive the notification email. It tells you, is this on a regulated species list? Has it been reported here before? And then other information like what lists it may be on, how can you report it, and so forth. So that tells us that, you know, these are the people who will receive this particular notification. Now, if I wanted to look you up, or if a verifier admin wanted to look you up, and we do have a couple of Florida verifier admins, people who can add people as verifiers. I can go to Admin Tools, and there's Manage Verifiers on the left under that section. And then if I wanted to, I could look up SOWINSKI. So this is what you're a verifier for. All plants in Polk, Highlands, Hardy, DeSoto, for both regulatory and not. So I didn't go over this page. So if I want to add someone as a verifier, one, you need to have an account. I can't just add emails for people. You need to have an account in our database. So let's say I wanted to add, let's pick on Chuck again, because I like picking on him. I want to add Chuck. Wow, he's got a lot of accounts. As a verifier. And user group is really only relevant in Minnesota, so I'm going to ignore that. Project is really only relevant with some older systems that we aren't really using anymore, as well as our Ag Pest Monitor system. Country defaults to the US. Let's say I want to add it for Florida. And I can go so far, like with you, I can add him for specific counties, and I can pick any number of counties I want to add him for. And then from there, I decide what he wants, what I want him to be a verifier for, or what he's told me or someone else has told me he should be a verifier for. He can be a verifier for, like you are, all something, all plants, all diseases, anything like that. Otherwise, I can add him as a verifier for something a little more specific. So with some of our USGS partners, I added them more specifically for, for aquatic invertebrates, which would include, snails and leeches and slugs and all different kinds of things like that. Or if he's got a very, very, very narrow focus, I can add him specifically as a verifier for, let's say, Japanese climbing fern and old world climbing fern. So say he just has an interest in those two things. I can say he is a verifier for Japanese climbing fern and for old world climbing fern in those two counties in Florida. We do have some people who are only interested in first instances. They only want to be a verifier for the first instance of something, and we can make them a verifier for that. So if he, let's say he just wants to know the first instance of Japanese climbing fern or old world climbing fern in Florida, I can add him for that. And like you are, I can add him as a regulatory verifier. So say he was an insects verifier in Florida. If I said he was a verifier for regulated species only, he would get your Asian longhorn beetle reports, he would get emerald ash borer reports, but he wouldn't get kudzu bug reports. So if I wanted to do that, I would then select Add Verifier, and that would add him as a verifier for these specific parameters. And then when he would go to the Review Records page, he would only see those specific records showing up. And he would only get notification emails for those specific records. So, like I was saying, anybody can go to this page and see who would be a verifier for a specific thing. And like I was saying, the reason we do it this way is because we do have people who have that very narrow focus. If I change this to brown marmorated stink bug, you're going to see Peter Jensch and George Hamilton. If you move that icon anywhere in the US, you're going to get George Hamilton and Peter Jensch anywhere. But that's nearly the only species they're verifiers for, and that's because that's what their research is in. So again, George Hamilton and Peter Jensch. So One thing we are wanting to do, and I think this will happen next year, is I've put up a to-do for our programmers. So if you go to my EDDMapS, you get your dashboard here. And again, this is reviewed data only. So these are my records for the past year. You can see in the top right, it tells you your date range. I've submitted this many records. I have this many records verified, I should say, reviewed by a verifier. Tells me what what my top subjects are, what what kind of breakouts I have. One thing we want to add is this type of dashboard, but for verifiers. So you would get to see what types of species you're verifying, how many you've verified, because there are a number of people in who have partnerships with us that if they had those numbers, that would be very useful for their own reporting, is to note how much they're doing in the EDDMapS system. So we do want to add that, and I've put the to-do up for that to happen. So I just wanted to let you guys know that that is coming at some point. So any other questions?
Rebecca, this is Kelly Gestring. I recently received a iNaturalist report from Melissa, and it had some pretty sketchy location coordinate on it. Is there a way for me to contact the iNaturalist reporter through EDDMapS or any other way?
So you would have to contact them in iNaturalist. Our communication between our two databases is not to that level yet. We do want at some point for us to be pulling updates from their system. We're not quite there yet. And at some point, and we have talked about this with them, we do want to have some sort of feedback from the work our verifiers do back to iNaturalist. We don't have that set up either at this point. So those are two things we want to do. Now, what I've been doing personally is, so in iNaturalist, and I sent this to someone the other day, but they do have like documentation and things like that on, let me see if shows up details. Accuracy. So we are harvesting their accuracy and their geo-privacy. If someone sets their geo-privacy to obscured, it basically says somewhere in this giant grid, this species occurs. And a lot of times that's not very useful. We did talk with a few of our verifiers who are also managers. They actually go out to these locations to manage for these species. We did talk to them, do you want us to not pull data over a certain level of accuracy? So 100 meters, 1,000 meters. Do you want us to not include that data? And they said, no, go ahead and pull all of it, because sometimes there's enough clues from the photos that we can tell where this is. And they were concerned about, especially for very high priority species, those going unnoticed because there was that barrier. For species where it's obviously hundreds or thousands of meters of inaccuracy, personally, I've been not adding those to our database, because at that point they could be crossing county lines, state lines, and it's just very, very not useful data. So if you did go into one of these records, you could ask them to, you can leave comments and you can ask them to increase their accuracy of the report. But for a lot of these people, they marked it to that level of accuracy intentionally.
Yeah, because I remember the accuracy being something like 36 kilometers, and
yeah,
I know of a population of this fish that's in the area, but it's even farther away than that. So
Yeah.
I just need to figure out, I need some more information. So I'll go through iNaturalist then. Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's where we are at this time. We don't have that ability to communicate with iNaturalist through EDDMapS. So, any other questions? And I'm going to go ahead and put my email up on the screen so you can see it. And if anybody has any questions, they can afterwards, they can email me. So if you come up with anything at a later time, you can email me any questions you may have. So I'm not seeing anything else in the chat. No one else is speaking up. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We do hope to have these once or twice a year. This was kind of catching up with people since we hadn't done one of these in quite some time. But we do get people coming and going from being a verifier, fairly on a yearly basis. So it would be a good thing to have these once or twice a year for updates as well as for new people. Updates we make to our system as well as for introducing new people to the verification system. So if nobody else has any questions, I'll go ahead and thank everyone for joining today. Glad to have you all. And thank you for being verifiers.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Hey, have a nice Christmas.
You guys have a good holiday season.
Thank you. Bye.